The iconic Martindale Hall is a state heritage place, as you all know. The property is a conservation park, which means it is to be managed with the objective of preserving the historic site and its structures. And it's also subject to a charitable trust in favour of the people of South Australia for them to have access to Martindale Hall for as long as they demonstrate they so desire, according to the document. My question is, do you see any heritage benefit in legislating to, first of all, abolish the conservation park status of the land, and secondly, to abolish the charitable trust?
Just checking I wasn't on mute for the dog earlier. In a way, that's an impossible question to answer because the government has simply refused to release its advice that the charitable trust in some way prevents an upgrade to a disabled access toilet. So without that information, I can't answer in the terms in which it's been asked. What I can say is that we successfully defeated the bill through Parliament that would have enabled both the removal of the conservation park status and also the charitable trust, because we simply weren't convinced that there was a proper logic to the argument that was being made. There was no vision. All of the legislation gave all of the power over to the minister to create policies that would then be enacted, which is manifestly inappropriate and inadequate. So our policy is that we will work with the National Trust and with the community, but primarily with the National Trust, to look at what the future of Martindale Hall ought to be, that it must be public access, that it must remain heritage, and that any legislative changes that may or may not be required to enable people in wheelchairs to go to the toilet would flow from that, rather than this ambit claim which happened in the last Parliament without explanation or justification.
Thank you. The Honourable Sam DeLuc.
Yeah, a really big issue for those who care about heritage in our community. And of course, I think really for the people of the Clare Valley as well. They need to really be part of the conversation about the future of Martindale Hall. And I think, what we've seen at Martindale Hall and now being proposed at Ayers House really comes on the back of, the fight that we had for the Gatehouse. These are state heritage listed assets. They need to remain state heritage listed assets, and they need to ensure that they remain accessible to the people of South Australia.
Thank you. The Honourable Frank Pangella.
Thank you, Chair. Well, of course, in the upper house, we refused to deal with that bill. And as has been pointed out, we wanted to see what the legal advice was on that trust. And the Minister is refusing to release it. And look, quite frankly, until the Minister releases it and we still have a say in the upper house, there's no way we're going to move on something that could open the way for Martindale Hall to be open to crass commercialisation, and at the same time, perhaps even deny the ability for the general public to actually go in there in the event that there is a commercial entity that is put in there and is essentially running the place. So a lot of work needs to be done on this, and I hope we can do something in the new Parliament that will ensure its future viability. Governments also need to spend money on these heritage places, and when we were there visiting and talking to the locals some months ago, it was disappointing to hear that the government was very slow in spending money on fixing leaking roofs and other maintenance jobs that needed to be done on it. It's almost as if they were just waiting for somebody to move in and pick up the costs. That shouldn't happen. So at this point, I think until we see a really good plan, now I do know that the National Trust did have a plan. It was probably the only plan that really was put up. Perhaps turn it into a type of sovereign hill with a bit of a historic touch. The National Trust is probably the only body that came up with a plan for it. Whether it's going to be viable, financially viable, is another thing. It's something for the Trust and its members to work out, and also in discussions with the government. But at this point, I think until we see what the advice was on that trust and whether it would disadvantage the South Australians and the community that really passionate about that historic site, unless they are satisfied with it, I think it's going to remain as another argument that needs to be put to rest by the Parliament.
Thank you, Frank. The Honourable Robert Sims.
Look, I think Martindale Hall is an iconic South Australian building, and it should be kept in public hands so that it can be enjoyed by the whole community, accessible and open to the public. And I fear that if the conservation status of that area is changed, that's going to be, a curtain raiser for efforts to remove conservation zones right across the state. It's really frustrating when you hear governments talking about, we can't afford to put the money into this, we can't afford to put the money into that. The reality is budgets, governments are all about priorities. And if the government wanted to, it could put the money in to ensure that this is being protected and to ensure that it's a high quality building that's enjoyed by all South Australians. It's pretty ironic that the site of picnic at Hanging Rock is being thrown off a cliff by the government. And I think, the people of South Australia deserve so much better. We've got to ensure that it's kept in public hands and is enjoyed by the community. And to Frank's point, the Greens, SA Best, the Labor Party, we all made it very clear we weren't going to be supporting this bill in the Parliament. And the government didn't progress it in the upper house as a result. I hope that they drop this proposal entirely and that, this election gives the Liberals an opportunity to drop this policy and instead that they put their attention on what can be done to protect these vital buildings rather than selling them off and putting them in private hands. We've seen the consequences of that throughout the CBD, and we touched on that earlier.
Thank you. A good conclusion to that topic.
Show your support on Facebook by signing the online petition